everybody. It's not really ever a bad day when you get to drive a V12 Ferrari. In fact, it's a very good day when you get to drive two, and an exceptional day when you're driving three beautiful V12 cars in a row. Now, this is the final video that I'm shooting today, but of course, as is always the way, these videos are going to be spread out over a little while. What you will have already seen is my video review of my 550, and what you've got to look forward to is a review of the V12 Vantage that is currently behind me. But what we're in now, and presumably what you're here for, is a 599 GTB. Now, the 599 is a bit of an odd car. I will just go out there and say it, this is never ever a car that I have wanted. Simply isn't. The 550 I've lusted after since I was a young lad, and things like the F12 do very, very strange things to me, but the 599 has never ever appealed, and there's one simple reason for that. I just don't like the way that it looks. On paper, it's an absolutely spectacular thing, a mighty car, but I just don't like it. And I think that's absolutely fine. It's very unlikely that anybody is going to always love every single car to come from a manufacturer. And when it comes to things like Ferraris, two proper serious dream cars, how something looks is extremely important. From the front, I actually really do like it, and the front three quarters is a very sexy thing. Even from profile, it's not too bad, but it's the rear. It's very, very high. It's got those weird buttresses, which I know do contribute to some actual real downforce, something my 550 probably doesn't have, but I just can't gel with it. It's also not got the classic Ferrari twin tail lights, which they've now gone back to with the 812. I just can't love it. Added to that, the fact that they're pretty much only available in the F1 single clutch automated manual gearbox. Yes, I do know that manuals were available for this car, but they are extremely rare, and they command a slightly silly price premium. The last time I saw one up for sale, they were asking £500,000. And when you consider for a moment that you can get one of these with the F1 box in perfectly decent condition for just over 80 grand, it's kind of hard to make a case for it. A lot of people, as with many Ferraris, are going to buy something like this simply for its engine, because this has up front a version of Ferrari's F140 motor, perhaps best known for its installation in the Enzo. Now, let's see what that does, shall we? Let's get the car straightened up and apply some right foot. Oh, it's elastic. It's I mean, I wasn't even troubling the red line, and whoa, it picks up really quickly. And now, one thing you have to bear in mind, boys and girls, and it's the same for you, I'm sure, as it is for me. Whenever you drive a car, what you expect, what you feel is always coloured by what you've just got out of, what you're used to. Whenever people ask me, is a car fast, I tend to ask them, what do they think fast means? I've just got out of a 510 horsepower Aston Martin V12 Vantage. This still feels stupid fast. I mean, really, really quick. Now, although, as mentioned, the 599 is not a car for me, I've been very excited for this review for a couple of reasons. First off, a few of my friends are very interested in acquiring their first Ferraris, and for them, something like the 550 is perhaps a little too much of a classic, something you have to work a little bit too much to get the best out of, but an F12 is then perhaps too much car, too expensive, or whatever. And therefore, the 599 sits in that really sweet spot in the middle. It's got plenty of power. I mean, let's face it, 620 horsepower. That's enough, I think, for most people, and they seem to be exceptionally good value. I know a lot of people, will be put off by the gearbox, and I have to say, so far, I'm actually quite impressed with it. It's not the smoothest around town in auto mode. It, of course, is at its absolute worst, but it's probably better than the system in the equivalent Aston Martin. And one thing I must also say for the car is the fact that it's I think, more comfortable than the Aston I've just got out of as well, and that does surprise me. Now, one reason I'm perhaps a little nervous about driving this car is because the people I know who've owned both a 599 and an F12 tell me that the 599 is the more leery car, is the scarier car. Unfortunately, because of the way that I film things, I actually did this video after the F12, and the F12 is quite a hairy car anyway. Well, let's have a bit more fun, shall we? It doesn't sound that incredible from in here. In fact, the main thing I can hear at the minute is some squeaks. This car, its owner will confess, isn't in pristine condition. It's actually an ex-Kuwaiti car, belonged to the Deputy Prime Minister of Kuwait or some such like. So he no doubt wasn't really worried about its thirst or its depreciation or really anything else. So it's quite a nice specification. Obviously, it's a left-hand drive car, but it's in Rosso Corsa with tan interior, carbon buckets with red Daytona stripes, carbon everywhere. It's got carbon shift lights on the wheel, carbon. It is quite a thing. It's also a lot of car, and I really do mean that. By volume, it's enormous. I parked this next to the 550 and I'll show you what that looked like, and you can tell that the 599 does seem to occupy quite a bit more space. At the rear in particular, this really is a car that fills the road, and being on the wrong side of it as well is quite interesting. However, unlike the Aston Martin, I can see quite a bit of that bonnet, and it's a car whose view is actually best from in here, not outside. I'm really actually rather enjoying this. This is awesome. This is also the first Ferrari V12 to get the Manettino switch. I have no experience of the 575, and that is the car that's in between the 550 and the 599, but in reality I see the 575 more as a facelifted 550, and I think very few people would actually argue with that. When you then take into account the fact that nobody really seemed to like the 575's changes that much, and I think comparing 550 with 599 seems like a fairer thing to do. This really is just a huge leap on. It genuinely is. It feels like a considerably more modern car. I can't make my mind up as to whether I think it feels better built or not than the 550. Although they actually weigh the same, this feels lighter. Oh yeah, so the F1 box in this does need a little bit of help, as with many of them. You just roll your foot off the throttle, and that will help the shift as well. And when you do it like that, they're actually pretty good. And my life, for a big old barge that I'm on the wrong side of, I can carry some serious speed down this road. This car is awesome. I was genuinely worried, really worried, that I wouldn't like this at all. That throttle response, oh my life, it's good. I mean, really good. Steering is very light. Oh, yeah, you can wash out a little bit there. You can catch it out. I think the tyres on this are not the freshest. And it's not got quite as much feel or the same weight as the 550. It's closer to, say, the F12 in that regard. And it's very darty. I mean, probably the issue with the 599 is that Ferrari have managed to make it feel so light that you could very easily forget that it isn't. Despite the fact that this is now an all aluminium car versus the steel tubular chassis that the 550 is, it weighs essentially the same. That is, I guess, impressive when you consider that this is a chunkier car overall. And you just cannot throw it down a road like an Elise. But you can throw it down a road like something much closer to an Elise than you would ever expect to be reasonable. I absolutely love these carbon bucket seats. They are the only thing I would ever have, and I would have the Daytona as well. This combination of Rosso Corsa over tan is utterly gorgeous. It feels proper Ferrari in here, leather everywhere. I absolutely love it. When you're controlling it yourself, the shifts can actually be quite smooth too. Now driving at a very sedate speed, about half the speed limit, to get a little bit of a gap between myself and the traffic ahead. And it's a really nice place to be. This car doesn't have the carbon ceramics on it, which its owner is very happy about, because they are somewhat cheaper than ceramics to replace, and the feel from them is brilliant. I actually prefer the brakes in this over the F12, which can be very difficult to modulate when you're not completely and totally on it. The rear end moves about, but much less easily than in the F12. This is genuinely a more usable car, and is an easier car to get the power down in. I'm sure tyre technology has helped move things on quite a bit since this car was introduced some 14 years ago now. That's incredible, isn't it? And it has a Bose sound system in here, which is not great, but it's better than in the 550, so Ferrari were, making leaps in terms of getting that right. The rear parcel shelf is usefully large, perhaps a little bit harder to get to than in the 550, but not bad. It's better than in, say, the F12. Rear boot space, not so great, unfortunately, because Ferrari moved the battery to the back, presumably for better weight distribution and to stop it cooking. It's not as big as you think, because in the 550, the boot goes to either side of the body of the car, whereas here, it only goes to the one side. Truly though, the 599 is actually something of a real surprise. My major criticism of it at the moment is that it simply doesn't sound good enough. This is a 620 horsepower V12 Ferrari with more torque than Mumsnet, and it sounds all right. That's not cool. The F12 sounds biblical. Even my 550, when it's on it, actually sounds pretty tasty too. This should sound better. It really should, and it just doesn't. Fortunately, there are quite a few aftermarket solutions for that. Now, people will always be, of course, concerned with things like this about running costs and whatnot, and I am afraid to say that this car has just cost its owner quite a bit of money, and unsurprisingly, it was the F1 gearbox. The accumulator in it went, and the repair bill was pretty big. Not 5 figures, but not far off. So if you're going to buy one of these, if you can, try and get a warranty. Believe it or not, some of them can still be warrantied by Ferrari. It's so incredibly flexible. It's got the torque of that Aston, yet it revs to 8.5 grand. That's obscene. I do feel like the front end is perhaps a little bit delayed. I tell it to do something, and then I feel like there is a moment where it gets itself going. The wheelbase in this car is a lot longer, so 200+ millimeter longer than in the 550, and that's a lot. The trade-off, of course, is going to be better mid-corner stability. The reality, though, at sensible speeds on the road, as long as you're not being a total gimboid, 599 is awesome. Absolutely sensational. Now, if I'm being perfectly honest, I've probably been a little bit too harsh on the old 599 today, because this is not the natural environment for this kind of car at all. Unusually for one of my reviews, I've actually spent quite a bit of time driving this car off camera, chiefly on motorways, and the simple fact is that is where this car truly shines. This is an impeccable Grand Tourer. It's quieter than the 550, these seats are extraordinarily comfortable, and I actually can relax. I didn't think I'd be able to do that during this review because I was worried about how leery this car was supposed to be. Everyone that owns an F12 and a 599 says it's the 599 that you have to keep an eye on. And yet, at no point today have I felt like this car was going to bite me. Sure, if I provoked it, I'm pretty confident that it would. But this is definitely a car that you can relax in, more so I think than in the F12. You can really enjoying it not going hell for leather. And it's extraordinarily comfortable. I mean, really remarkably supple. Perhaps the only downside is that suppleness comes at the cost of a little bit of body control. There is this odd delay between turning the wheel and something happening. See, it's just a little something. Now, there's every chance that in this car's 67,000 kilometers, the suspension components and bushings have worn just a little bit, and a refresh of those might sharpen the car up. I know that you could get a few handling upgrades for these, including the HGTE version, but those again make the car sharper at the expense of this glorious ride quality. And frankly, this car is so good at cruising. The fact that it can do these back roads with the speed that it can at all is simply a miracle. And the fact that I can enjoy it and chill out in it is utterly unbelievable. The 599 really is one of the great surprises for me, not just of this year, but of all time. It's a fabulous car. I still don't want one, but I'm really glad that I've driven one. And if you're thinking of buying one, you definitely should give it a go.